Before we begin, listener, remember to gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Tonight, I'll take you through the quiet halls where the walls still breathe, where every sound means something, even when no one's there to make it. 5 stories, each one a whisper left behind by those who never truly left. So, turn down the lights, lie still, and listen carefully, because some sounds don't stop when you wake up. The bell that rang at midnight. My name is Elias Ward, assistant priest under Father Marin at St. Adriel's Church, a lonely chapel crouched on the cliffs of Northumberland. I arrived there in late November, when the wind cut through the fields like a blade, and the sea below beat the rocks without rest. The village was small, only 20 souls, most too old to kneel. They warned me of one thing only: never stay in the chapel past midnight. Entins. I laughed. Of course, I was young, and faith made me arrogant. That first night, I was cataloging hymnals when I heard it faint at first, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. Then it swelled, a single bell chime, heavy and perfect, floating down from the tower above. The strange part was, the bell rope had been cut years ago after the sexton's death. The candles along the pews leaned, one by one, as though bowing to the sound. Dust shimmered through the air, trembling with every note, and for the briefest moment, I thought I heard breathing not from the tower, but from within the bronze echo itself. The bell tolled once more, softer, as if calling a name I hadn't yet learned, but somehow belonged to me. I hardly slept that night. The sound of the bell, its impossible, mournful echo, kept replaying in my mind long after the candle burned itself to death on my desk. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, or perhaps the iron hinges contracting in the cold, but the tone had been too pure, too deliberate. Bells don't ring themselves. The next morning, Father Marin found me pale and unsteady. He gave a short laugh, said the tower had a mind of its own, and that I'd get used to its moods. Yet, when I asked if I might see the bell, his smile collapsed. "The stairs are unsafe," he said, "and some things prefer to be left alone. Well, I will do self to way." That afternoon, I noticed something peculiar. The children from the village refused to walk past the church gate. Even the stray dogs skulked wide of the wall. By dusk, the sea mist had rolled in, thick as milk, smothering the graveyard and wrapping itself around the spire. I stayed to finish prayers, alone again. At 11:45, I heard movement above the rafters, soft, like fabric brushing stone. Then, a knock, 3 slow taps, evenly spaced, from somewhere behind the altar. I froze. The tower door was bolted. Father Marin had the only other key. Another knock. Then a dragging sound, like rope pulled through wood grain. The candles flickered toward the sound. I turned, heart hammering, and saw that the small brass key, the one they'd given me on my first day, had slid from my pocket and now rested on the floor, gleaming faintly. It trembled once, as though moved by a draft, and then began to turn in place, tracing a slow circle against the stone. I whispered a prayer, voice shaking. The air grew colder, dense enough to taste. The crucifix above the altar creaked, its chain tightening, and then there it was again, the bell, but quieter this time, as if wrung from deep underwater. I followed the sound to the tower door. The wood was swollen and cracked, nailed shut decades ago. Still, something behind it breathed. I pressed my ear to the seam and heard a voice, thin, distant, echoing upward through the hollow stairwell. "Elias, the rope is waiting." I stumbled back, clutching the key. The whisper was gone. Only the slow drip of water from the roof remained, steady as a metronome. But when I looked up at the crucifix once more, I noticed the figure of Christ was no longer upright. The cross hung crooked, as though someone or something had tried to pull it down. The key in my hand was warm again, and from the tower above, wood shifted against stone, like a body turning in its sleep. The next evening, the fog returned earlier than usual. It slithered from the sea, pooling around the chapel like breath from an unseen lung. I had decided I wouldn't be afraid, not of superstition, not of a bell, not of my own imagination. Faith, I told myself, is tested in silence. But Saint Adriel's had no silence. It listened back. At dusk, I found Father Marin in the rectory, sorting candles. His hands trembled when I mentioned the tower. "You heard it again, didn't you?" he said. I did. "Well, then pray it doesn't remember you by tales." He refused to speak further. That night, I stayed behind again, determined to uncover whatever hid above those stones. I lit a single lantern, its flame trembling like a heartbeat. The church was still until exactly 11:57. Then came the first sign, the wooden pews groaning, as if someone unseen knelt on them. One by one, a deep creak moved slowly down the aisle toward me. By the time it reached the altar, the air was no longer cold. It pulsed with warmth, rhythmic, almost alive. From the tower door came a click. The nails that sealed it began to shift, metal whining against old oak. I whispered, "In the name of the Father," but my voice died under another sound, the bell's low hum, not ringing now, but breathing. It vibrated through the floor, a pulse in the stone itself. I stepped closer. The brass key in my pocket twitched like a living thing. Another chime, higher this time, echoing upward through the rafters, bouncing back, distorted, as if the church itself tried to imitate it. The stained glass windows trembled. Colors shivered across the walls like veins of light. Then came the whispers, layered voices, many, overlapping in a murmur too low to separate. I could almost catch words between them. Pull. Remember. Replace. My lantern guttered. In the brief dark, something brushed past my sleeve, cold, deliberate. I raised the light again and saw faint footprints in the dust, small and bare, leading toward the tower. I followed. Each step groaned beneath me. The tower door, once sealed, now stood slightly ajar, blackness yawning beyond it. A smell of rust and salt filled my throat. When I pushed the door, it opened with a sigh. Spiral stairs rose into shadow, the rope of the bell dangling loose from above, swaying though there was no wind. Halfway up, I heard it, breathing, close, timed perfectly with the bell's slow rhythm. My own breath tried to match it without my consent. Something whispered from the top, landing my name, drawn out like a prayer. "Elias." I stopped. "Who's there?" "I have me." The reply came not in words, but in sound, the scrape of metal against stone, followed by a second bell tone, lighter, uncertain, as though struck from inside flesh. My vision blurred. The vibration crawled up through the steps into my bones. I forced myself higher, each step an act of defiance against the tremor inside me. The stairs narrowed, and the air smelled of burnt rope and dust. At the final turn, I saw it, the bell, immense, green with age, swaying gently though no wind touched it. The rope stump moved as if gripped by invisible hands. And beneath the bell, a pair of shoes, old, rotted leather, still laced, still pointed downward. They hung an inch above the floor. The bell gave a single convulsion, its lip vibrating with a wet, muffled tone as though something inside had struck it. I lifted my lantern higher. The flame bent backward, drawn toward the hollow of the bell itself. A whisper rose from within, layered, urgent. "Let it ring. Elias, you owe the sound. Trey." The rope jerked once, violently, and the bell began to move. I stumbled backward down the steps, but the tower pulsed around me, walls shuddering with every breath of metal. The sound grew louder, faster, until it was no longer music. It was screaming in a language made of iron. And through it all, between the strikes, another rhythm began, one I couldn't place at first, until I realized it matched the beating of my own heart. The bell was not calling out. It was answering. The bell slowed. Each swing came with a deep, wet groan, as if it struggled to breathe. I pressed my back against the cold wall of the stairwell, the lantern shaking in my grip. Every clang rolled through my ribs, through the marrow of my teeth, until my vision flickered white. Then silence. The rope hung motionless again, a thin thread reaching into darkness. The air smelled of dust and rusted salt, but beneath that lingered something sweeter, rotten like lilies left too long on a grave. I forced myself up the last few steps until I reached the bell chamber. The space was smaller than I'd imagined, hemmed in by wooden beams, blackened with age. The only light came from my lantern, which threw the bell's shadow, enormous, across the walls. The shoes were still there, old leather, stiff, hanging just above the floor. But now, I saw what I hadn't before. The faint outline of ankles, thin and gray, barely visible, swaying slightly in rhythm with the rope. A whisper crawled through the air. "Ring for me, brains." My throat locked. "Who are you?" "Way." The answer came not in words, but in the movement of the rope. It coiled once around itself, like a noose remembering its purpose. And then the lantern flame bent sideways, not because of wind, because something moved between it and me. A human shape, featureless, blurred like smoke, but dense enough to block the light. I could feel it looking at me. "You have the key," the voice rasped, not from the air, but from inside the bell itself. "Open the door below. Let the sound finish. Gouda." I took a trembling step backward. "No. I don't even know what you are." "Problix." The bell rang once, soft but furious. The sound made my stomach turn. A wave of nausea climbed my throat, and I realized the vibration wasn't fading. It was inside me, matching my pulse. The apparition drifted closer. The air around it shimmered like heat. I caught fragments of a face, hollow eyes, lips stitched shut with shadow, the same shape as the portrait of the old sexton, the one who'd died here decades ago. He promised he'd take my place. The voice hissed, but he left me to hang, half wrung. "She samesakt." The figure pointed at the bell. Inside, beneath the layer of corrosion, I saw something that froze my blood. Handprints, dozens of them, pressed from within the metal, each reaching outward as though trying to escape. My hand found the cross around my neck. I tried to speak a prayer, but my voice cracked, each syllable warped by the echo. The spirit tilted its head, as if listening to my heartbeat. Then, suddenly, the door at the base of the tower slammed shut below, sealing me in. The sound of the latch echoed like a drumbeat. The bell rope twitched again. "Finish it, Elias. End so." The sound behind the voice shifted. Not one spirit, now many, whispering through each other, weaving into the same rhythm. The tower vibrated like a throat clearing itself to scream. I lunged toward the stairs, but the first step splintered beneath my foot. The boards seemed to rot in real time, flaking to dust. The air grew so dense that every breath felt like inhaling sand. Behind me, the bell swayed again, though no rope moved. The hands pressed against the bronze began to shift, hurling, reaching, and in that shimmering chaos of sound and shadow, I understood what the key was for not to open a door, but to free a sound that should have never been caged. The apparition smiled without a mouth. Heaven forgot us, but the bell remembers. But self. The key in my pocket burned through the fabric. I threw it aside, and it clattered across the floor straight into the hollow of the bell. The metal swallowed it whole, and the next toll that came was deafening too close, as if it came from inside my skull. I fell to my knees, hands over my ears, but the sound crawled in through my bones. Between the strikes, I heard words forming distorted, layered with screams and psalms and laughter. "Ring for me," or "ring for you, that's two." The lantern burst, and the flame died. Only the bell's glow remained a sick, dull orange pulsing like a heartbeat. And from within that light, I saw a face forming in the bronze, my own, eyes hollow, lips moving silently, mouthing the same words I could now hear beneath the next toll. "You've already begun." And so, by dawn, the bell tower was silent again. The air had thinned, and the cold that gripped my bones began to fade, leaving behind a tremor I couldn't pray away. When I finally dared to move, the door at the base of the stairs, sealed only moments ago, now hung open, hinges still shivering. I stumbled out into the nave, half blind with exhaustion. The crucifix above the altar had straightened itself. The candles, once melted to nubs, stood tall again, their wicks unburned. For a long moment, I thought I'd dreamed it all. Father Marin found me slumped beside the altar. He didn't ask questions. He only pressed a cup of bitter coffee into my shaking hands and muttered, "The first time is always the loudest. Mastbecht." I tried to speak, to tell him what I'd seen, but he raised a hand. "Don't. The more you name it, the closer it listens." Chaktensis. The next few days passed in a blur. I went about my duties, lighting candles, cleaning pews, reciting prayers. The villagers avoided my eyes. Children stopped playing near the chapel. At night, I dreamt of bronze walls and hands reaching outward, fingertips rasping against the inside of metal. I woke each morning with the echo of the bell humming faintly in my ears. Then, one evening, as I was preparing to lock the church, I realized something chilling. The bell rope, which had hung lifeless for decades, was whole again. A new length of hemp dangled from the ceiling, clean and strong, its fibers still smelling of sea salt. I called out for Father Marin, but he wasn't in his quarters. The rectory door stood open, his cassock draped neatly on a chair, as though he had stepped out for air and never returned. Trying to steady my breath, I left the church and walked down the narrow path toward the village. The sea wind clawed at my face. The fog came rolling low over the cliffs. Yet amid the hiss of the waves, I caught another sound, distant, rhythmic, unmistakable. The bell. It tolled once, faint but distinct, from behind me. I turned, and stained. Adriel's stood still, its tower dark against the dimming sky. No movement, no light, but the echo rolled again, 2 chimes this time, and the vibration went straight through my chest. When I reached the chapel doors, the key refused to fit the lock. It turned smoothly, yet the mechanism would not catch. As though the door wasn't keeping me out, it was keeping something in. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. My breath fogged the glass of the holy water font as I leaned over it, trembling. The water rippled once, then again, though my hand hadn't touched it. A reflection bloomed on the surface, the tower stairs, the hanging shoes, the faint outline of the bell above. Then, slowly, the reflection turned its head toward me. I fell back, spilling the water across the floor. The sound it made wasn't a splash, but a ring, a high, metallic tone that echoed far longer than it should. My ears throbbed. The church seemed to breathe again. The pews groaned. Somewhere above, wood flexed as if under great weight. And yet, the bell did not toll. Not that night. Not the next. For nearly a week, peace returned. The air grew warmer, the light less pale. I began to believe it had ended, that I had broken whatever curse lay in that tower. But faith, I've learned, often disguises fear as hope. On the 8th night, as I drifted to sleep in my small room behind the chapel, I heard a faint rhythm beneath the wind. Not the bell, but something subtler, a heartbeat. It came from beneath the floorboards, slow and steady, syncing with mine. And then, faintly, a whisper rose with it, familiar, gentle, almost tender. You opened the door, Elias. Now all that's left is to ring. As it, I shot up, gasping, but there was only silence. My crucifix lay on the pillow beside me. The chain snapped clean. When I reached for it, the metal was warm, pulsing, as though it too remembered the sound. The morning after the whisper, the world felt misaligned. The sunlight through my window came in wrong slanted, too still. The air held a faint hum that never quite stopped, a vibration under the skin like a fever I couldn't sweat out. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something in that tower hadn't finished with me. I dressed without thought, leaving the rosary on the desk where it lay, coiled like a dead thing. Outside, the fog was thicker than ever. St. Adriel's spire bled through it like a spear of bone. The sea below was silent. Even the gulls had gone. The chapel door opened before I touched it. Inside, the pews were covered in a thin layer of dust, as if decades had passed overnight. My footprints were the only new marks. The altar candles burned with blue flames. Above them, the crucifix tilted slightly to one side again, mocking me. The rope hung waiting in the nave, new, strong, clean. I reached for it, but the moment my hand touched the hemp, a sound burst through the church, not the bell, not yet, but breathing, wet and close, as if exhaled into my ear. You heard it once, the whisper said. Now make it remember you. Weisend. The air convulsed. The candles went out. The walls began to sing. A low vibration crawled up the pillars. A choir of wordless tones, rising in pitch until the sound felt like it was clawing at my teeth. The stained glass began to sweat condensation. Drops ran down the painted faces of saints like tears of blood. I backed toward the tower door. It wasn't nailed anymore. It stood open, inviting. My lantern flickered once, twice, then steadied, and from above, faint but unmistakable, came the bell's heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. Each note slower than the last, each one dragging the air tighter, until the church felt smaller, closer, suffocating. I began to climb. The stairs groaned under my weight. Dust fell in thin veils around me. Halfway up, I noticed the rope wasn't just dangling, it followed me. It brushed my shoulder with every step, though there was no breeze. When I looked back, I could swear it was longer now, its end slithering down the stairs, dragging softly across stone like something alive. At the top, the bell awaited impossibly still. The same hanging shoes swayed gently, as though stirred by unseen feet. Beneath them, the floor bore a dark stain that hadn't been there before. And on the bell's lip, my key rested, gleaming faintly. It shouldn't have been possible. I'd left it there nights ago, watched it vanish into the metal. Yet now it sat waiting as if returned. My hand shook as I picked it up. The metal burned against my palm, searing, cold, and hot at once. "Elias," said the voice, now close, inside my skull. "The tower remembers its servant. The rope needs a hand. One." Something moved inside the bell, a ripple under the bronze. I stepped closer and saw, beneath the thin skin of metal, a reflection, my own face, distorted, smiling back at me. It whispered without lips. The sound must finish where it began. Patience. And then the bell moved. A single, deep swing that made the whole tower bend. Dust exploded from the rafters. My lantern died, plunging everything into a darkness that pulsed red with every chime. The vibration became unbearable. My chest clenched, my teeth ached, my eyes watered. I stumbled backward, shouting prayers that turned to static in my ears. But the voice came clearer than ever. "He rang it for me. Now you ring it for him. Thanks for watching." The rope snapped tight around my wrist. I screamed, pulling away, but it wound itself higher, tightening until my fingers went numb. The bell swung again, and the world tilted with it. I could feel the air rip through me, the pressure crushing my ribs as the tone built to a scream. Images flashed behind my eyes, the old sexton hanging here, gasping. The moment before his neck broke, Father Marin watching from below, the villagers praying with their ears covered. And beneath all of it, another memory that wasn't mine the night I first arrived, the way the wind whispered my name before anyone had spoken it aloud. I understood then. The bell didn't summon the dead. It replaced them. Each ring was a trade. One soul freed, another bound to the metal. "Let it ring, Elias," the voice groaned, "or hang forever silent." As their prods, I did what any coward would. I pulled. The bell exploded in sound. The walls of the tower cracked. The windows below shattered. I felt something tear loose from my chest, not flesh, but sound. My own voice, stretched thin, screaming wordlessly through the bronze. The bell swung again, but now I couldn't hear it, only feel it, vibrating through my hollowed ribs. The rope loosened, dropping from my hand like a dead snake. For a moment, the air cleared. The fog outside drew back. The sea roared once, as if exhaling. Then silence. I was on the floor of the tower, blood trickling from my ears, lungs raw from screaming. The shoes that had hung above were gone. The rope lay limp. The bell rested still. I staggered down the stairs, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the nave, Father Marin was standing at the altar, eyes glazed as if he hadn't blinked in days. "It's done," I croaked. He nodded slowly, for now, with thumbs. Outside, dawn broke. The mist lifted. I fell to my knees and wept. And then a sound rolled across the cliffs. Not loud, not proud, just inevitable. The bell of St. Adriel's rang once more. Father Marin smiled, almost kindly. "You see, my boy," he murmured, "every apprentice must take his master's place. I am—" When I looked down, the brass key was gone. Only the mark on my wrist remained, a perfect ring of rope burn, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat under skin. I left St. Adriel's before the next dusk. The sea mist followed me down the cliff road, curling around the wheels of the old parish cart like smoke from an unseen censer. Father Marin didn't come to see me off. Only the empty chapel watched, its bell tower black against a bruised sky. The villagers said nothing. They simply turned their faces away as I passed, some making the sign of the cross, others whispering prayers that ended in silence. I thought I understood then what the bell demanded, what I'd given, but all I truly felt was a strange stillness, the kind that settles after something inside you stops moving. I spent that night at a coastal inn 10 miles away. The room was small, smelling of salt and candle wax. When I lay down, I told myself I'd never return to Northumberland, that I would forget the tower, the rope, the voice. I almost believed it. Sometime past midnight, I woke to the faint creak of wood above me, the sound of a beam shifting, then a slow, heavy sway back and forth, followed by the soft whisper of rope through air. I sat up, heart hammering. The inn's rafters were low. Nothing hung from them, yet the rhythm continued, patient, deliberate. And then it came, a single bell tone, small, hollow, as if struck from inside the walls. The air turned cold. The water in the glass beside my bed quivered with each vibration. Beneath it, a reflection formed faint, bronze, circular. My throat tightened. I reached for the crucifix on the nightstand. It was gone. The bell chimed again, closer now, inside the room. I turned toward the window, and through the fogged glass, I saw it. The outline of St. Adriel's tower, impossibly near, its shape shimmering like a mirage. From its shadow, a voice drifted through the wind, patient and calm. "The next confession is waiting, Father Elias," referred for hail. The third toll shook the glass, and when it faded, the only sound left was my own breathing, steady, in rhythm with the silence that waited to be filled. Story 2. The confession that wasn't heard. After St. Adriel's, I told myself I would rest. 2 weeks in a small monastery on the outskirts of Durham, that was all I asked for. No bells, no sermons, no fog, just silence. But silence, I've learned, is never truly empty. It only waits for the next sound to begin. The brothers there were kind enough. They said little, prayed often, and let me sleep as long as I wished. Yet every night, as I lay on the narrow cot, I could still feel it, that faint vibration beneath my ribs, the phantom echo of a bell that had stopped ringing but refused to fade. My rest ended sooner than I hoped. The archdiocese sent word, a transfer, temporary but urgent. Another rural church, smaller this time, in the outskirts of York. Father Marin had gone missing, they said, and someone had to tend the parish until his replacement arrived. I tried to refuse. They said my name had been personally requested. The letter was unsigned. By dawn, I was on the road again, the rosary heavy in my pocket, the fog returning to meet me halfway. The church was called St. Mary of the Vale, And the first thing I noticed when I arrived was the sound of someone knocking from inside the confessional. The Church of Saint Mary of the Vale was smaller than Saint Adriel's, but older, a single nave of crumbling limestone and stained glass windows, so faded the saints looked like ghosts staring through fog. The roof sagged. Ivy strangled the bell tower. The parish keeper, a frail woman named Agnes, greeted me with downcast eyes and hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "We haven't had a priest stay longer than a month," she whispered, guiding me through the narrow aisles. "They all say the same thing. It's the confessional. It listens." Well, her words stirred something in me, a quiet dread, or perhaps recognition. That evening, I began my first service. Only a handful of villagers attended, huddled near the back as if afraid of the altar's shadow. The sermon passed without incident, but afterward, as I was preparing to extinguish the candles, I heard it again, that sound. Knock, knock, knock. 3 even taps from the side of the nave, the confessional booth. At first, I thought someone had lingered to speak with me privately. I crossed the aisle, drew back the curtain, and spoke softly. "You may begin your confession, my child." Name and silence. Then, a breath, long, deliberate, not nervous, rehearsed. "Bless me, Father, for I have remembered." Way. The voice was low and close, pressed against the thin lattice between us. It didn't echo like a normal whisper would. It slid through the wood as though the speaker were not beside the partition, but inside it. I swallowed hard. "Go on," I managed. "It happened in the tower," the voice said, quivering like a taut string. The bell would not stop. I tried to leave, but he said the sound needed a keeper. Rage and to problems. My heart lurched. That word keeper, it was the same Father Marin had used at Saint Adriel's. I leaned closer, the lattice biting against my forehead. "Who said that? Who are you?" "Wait." The breath quickened on the other side. The smell of damp stone and iron filled the booth. "He wore your face, Father." Too passant. The curtain between us fluttered once. The air went still. When I pulled it aside, the other seat was empty. Only the small wooden kneeler remained, the leather cushion indented, still warm as if someone had just been there. I stepped out into the nave. The lamps flickered weakly. The last candle guttered out. And from somewhere above, faint, almost imagined I heard it. A bell, ringing just once, far away, or perhaps directly beneath the floor. When I looked back toward the confessional, the door had closed again. And this time, I could see breath misting softly through the slats from inside. The next night, I swore I wouldn't go back into that booth. I told myself the voice was memory, an echo from the nightmare I'd left behind at St. Adriel's. But denial, I've learned, has its own sound. It hums quietly until you listen. By evening, Mary of the Vale had already begun to change. The air was thicker, sweet with incense, though I hadn't burned any. The floorboards under the pews creaked in slow rhythm, as though someone invisible was pacing the aisles. When I unlocked the confessional, a gust of cold air poured out, carrying the scent of damp wood and candle wax long extinguished. The tiny lamp inside flickered on by itself unlit, yet burning. And then, from somewhere within the wooden frame, came a whisper. "You came back. Well." I froze. My voice, when it came, was smaller than I intended. "If you seek confession, you may begin," Tent say. Silence. Then, A perfect imitation of my tone repeated. If you seek confession, you may begin. Way. The words bounced between us like a prayer reflected through a mirror. My pulse quickened. I pressed a hand to the lattice, feeling the grain of the wood. It pulsed faintly, warm beneath my fingers. "Who are you?" I asked. "Who are you?" it answered. The repetition was exact same cadence, same breath. But as it echoed, the voice aged, deepened, as though time itself spoke back through the grain. A soft knock followed, 3 taps. The confessional shuddered. The candlelight outside dimmed until the church sank into half-darkness. I felt the wooden frame tighten, the air drawn thin. The whisper came again, this time a half-step behind my heartbeat. "Elias, say it after me. And for Lee." I tried to stand, but my legs refused. The bench beneath me groaned like an old spine. "Bless me, Father, for I have remembered." Portist. The phrase crawled out of the wood, layered now with multiple voices, male, female, child, all speaking in unison. "Bless me, Father, for I have remembered." The scent of iron filled the air. The wall separating us throbbed with every word, as though it had grown lungs. I forced my voice out. "What do you remember?" "Truth." A pause. "Then, you..." "Quite." The door to the booth slammed shut. Total darkness. The lamp burst with a soft hiss, spraying hot oil across my sleeve. I pressed myself against the wall, gasping for breath. Something moved in the space beside me, bare feet on stone, the faint scrape of fingernails against the inner wood. "You said the sound would end," the voice hissed, this time not mimicking but pleading. "You said the bell was silence. When is they self?" I reached for the latch, but it wouldn't move. The entire confessional began to shake, violently now, as though something inside was trying to claw its way out. My crucifix struck the wall, chiming like metal against bone. Then the knocking again. 1, 2, 3. But this time, each knock came from a different direction. The wall, the ceiling, the floor. The rhythm built faster, overlapping, until it no longer sounded like knocking at all, but like heartbeat multiplied, echoing from every corner of the church. And beneath that rhythm, rising slowly, came another sound, a faint ringing, distant but growing clearer with each pulse. The bell. I forced the latch open and stumbled out into the nave. The sound followed me, rolling along the floorboards, growing louder the further I fled. The church doors flew open on their own. Cold air poured in, but before I could step outside, I turned back just once and saw through the slats of the confessional, something that froze my blood. A figure sat inside. My cassock, my hands folded in prayer, and when its head turned toward me, its face was mine, whispering through a smile I didn't remember giving. "Your turn to listen, Father." "Why?" The bell rang once, and the echo didn't fade. It followed. I did not sleep that night. The bell's echo clung to my thoughts like smoke that wouldn't clear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that booth, the slats breathing, the reflection of my own face mouthing prayers I hadn't spoken. At dawn, I found Agnes scrubbing the stone floor near the altar. She stopped when she saw me and crossed herself 3 times. "You heard it, didn't you?" she whispered. "Heard what?" "Nigh. The one who never left," Ressard. Before I could press her further, she fled the church, leaving her bucket overturned, water spreading across the cracked floor like a shadow finding its shape. By sunset, I decided, I would confront it, whatever it was, because fear thrives in silence, and I had lived too long inside its patience. The confessional waited in the same stillness as before. Dust floated in the half-light, golden and innocent, as if nothing foul had ever stirred here. I stepped inside and closed the curtain behind me. The hinges sighed softly, like an old man breathing in his sleep. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a whisper barely audible from the other side of the lattice. "Bless me, Father, for I have remembered," as the voice was the same as before, but quieter, almost weary. I steadied my breath. "You may speak freely, my child. As go. I killed him. Nines." The air tightened. I felt the booth lean closer. "Who did you kill?" "One is the priest, the one who tried to listen. He opened the booth when he shouldn't have. He took what wasn't his to hear. I think this Farady." A memory flickered Father Marin's voice at St. Adriel's, whispering about the sound that shouldn't be touched, are different. "You mean Father Marin?" "Trines." The voice trembled, but not in confusion. "In amusement. Names change, but the sound stays the same. Aid." Then laughter, soft and wrong, like someone trying to imitate joy without remembering what it feels like. The wood under my hand began to pulse again, slow, rhythmic, as though a heart had been buried within it. I leaned closer to the lattice. The space on the other side was darker than it should have been, an absence so dense it seemed to drink the light. "Why do you repeat my words?" I asked. A pause. Then, "Because you're still inside. To have self." My throat tightened. Inside what? Well, the booth. Kimes had complained. I almost laughed, but the sound died in my chest. Something in the air shifted. The smell of dust turned sweet, cloying, like old incense. My ears popped, as though pressure were building between the walls. Then I heard a sound I will never forget. A heartbeat, slow and deep, coming not from my chest, but from the wood around me. I tore back the curtain and stepped out, only to find that I hadn't moved at all. I was still inside, the same narrow seat, the same lattice before me. But this time, I could see through it. On the other side sat another me face pale, eyes hollow, lips cracked from whispering too many prayers. He smiled faintly and tilted his head. "You shouldn't have answered, Elias. Thank for watching." He lifted a hand, and the lattice shuddered. Splinters spread like veins across the frame. My reflection's voice deepened, echoing from everywhere at once. Every sin confessed here stays until someone listens. What is stand? Then he pressed his palm against the wood. A perfect handprint burned through, blackening the grain. Smoke curled from the edges. I staggered back, coughing, and the booth began to breathe, each exhale carrying a chorus of whispers. Marin's voice, the sexton's, dozens more, all folding into one prayer that was never meant for heaven. "Ego te absolvo," they chanted, mockingly. "Ego te absolvo." I stumbled toward the door, but it refused to open. The booth's walls warped, bowing inward. My reflection leaned closer, pressing its face against the lattice until the wood began to splinter under the pressure. "You came to listen," it said, voice now layered with the others. "Now you'll hear what never stops." And reshout. The final thing I remember before the world went dark was the sound of hundreds of hands knocking in unison inside the walls, beneath the floor, within the pews, each one pleading for a listener. Then, silence. When I awoke, I was lying before the altar, the booth behind me quiet, whole, and untouched. But when I looked down at my hands, my palms were blackened with soot, and the scent of burnt wood clung to my skin. And from somewhere deep within the church walls came a single word, breathed slowly, reverently, my own voice, whispering back at me, "Confess." And 5, when I opened my eyes again, daylight had returned to Saint Mary of the Vale. The church looked different, cleaner somehow, lighter, almost kind. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams. The pews no longer creaked. The confessional stood quietly in its corner, its dark mouth sealed, as though it had never moved, never breathed, never spoken. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. Agnes found me kneeling at the altar. She seemed calmer, even relieved. "It's quieter now," she said softly, folding her hands. "Whatever you did last night, Father, it helped. The church feels lighter." And he was faith. Her words were a mercy I wanted to believe. I smiled a brittle, tired smile, and spent the day tending to simple tasks, polishing candlesticks, mending the hymnals, sweeping the aisle. The sound of the broom on stone was almost soothing, steady and human. That night, I slept without dreams. The next morning, the bell in the tower tolled once at dawn, a clean, ordinary note that echoed peacefully through the hills. I almost laughed at how normal it sounded. For the first time in months, I dared to pray aloud without hearing another voice join in. I told myself the haunting was over, that the voice in the booth had finally been laid to rest. But peace, I've learned, is the cruelest trick the dead can play. The following evening, a man came to confession. He was the first since my arrival, a thin, gray figure in a worn coat, his eyes dark and fevered. His hands trembled as he pressed them together. "Bless me, Father," he whispered, "for I have sinned, refined." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I pitied him. I gestured for him to continue. "It's been a long time since my last confession," he said. "So long, I almost forgot how to start. Everything." The smell of sea salt drifted in faint, wrong. Something about it tugged at me, old and familiar. "Take your time," I said gently. Silence followed, stretching thin. Then he began to speak, halting, unsure. "I did something terrible. Long ago, in another parish, I told him the bell was cursed. I begged him not to touch it, but he wouldn't listen. He thought faith could fix everything. He said the sound couldn't hurt us. My blood ran cold. "Who did you tell this to?" "Well, you desired." The voice changed mid-word. Its tone thickened, deepened the way sound warps underwater. I felt every muscle in my body turn rigid. The confessional lattice trembled. "You told me to ring it, Father Elias. You said the silence was worse." And I stood. "Who are you?" I demanded. No answer. Only the faint sound of someone breathing closer now, too close from the same side of the lattice as me. I pulled back the curtain. The booth was empty. No, not empty. Something dark coated the seat. A perfect handprint burned into the leather, still smoking faintly. My rosary snapped in my fist. The lights overhead flickered and died. Then, from every corner of the church, through the pipes, through the walls, through the cracks in the floor, came voices, whispering over each other like a tide of murmurs. I couldn't make out words, only a pattern. Breath, pause, breath, pause, like a chant with no meaning. The air thickened until breathing hurt. I stumbled toward the door, but it wouldn't open. The wood beneath my palms was slick with condensation. The confessional began to creak again. The curtain lifted slightly, though there was no wind. "You said you'd listen," the voice murmured, my own voice. Softer now, almost kind. "And now they've all come to speak." And the whispers rose, hundreds of them, pleading, confessing, crying, remembering. The entire church vibrated like a hollow instrument, full of trapped echoes. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears, but the sound came from inside my head, each whisper a memory that wasn't mine. Names, sins, prayers that had been swallowed by the booth for centuries. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The lamps flared to life. The air cleared. The confessional stood still once more. Only one thing remained changed: the seat inside. It was no longer empty. A shape sat there still, shadowed the faint outline of a man, head bowed, hands clasped. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate rhythm. And from between his fingers, something gleamed faintly, a brass key, slick with blood, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The figure didn't move. It sat motionless in the confessional's shadow, head bowed, the brass key glinting faintly between clasped hands. I told myself it couldn't be real, that my mind, bruised by fear and sleeplessness, was shaping ghosts from candlelight. Yet the rhythm of its breathing was unmistakable. In, out, in, out. Each breath matched mine. I stepped closer. The air around the booth was heavy, metallic. A thin trickle of wax ran down the nearest candle, moving slower than gravity allowed. My shadow swayed against the wall, as though trying to pull away. "Who are you?" I whispered. The figure lifted its head. The face beneath the hood was pale, wet, eyes closed, but the mouth moved. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Was Ness? It was my voice. The key slipped from its fingers and rolled toward me, stopping at my feet. I stared at it, heart hammering, the metal faintly warm as if freshly held. The sound of breathing continued, but the figure's chest no longer rose. I bent down to pick up the key. The moment my skin touched it, the church shifted. The pews groaned like sleeping bodies turning over. The stained glass windows bled light in reverse colors, draining inward, as if being swallowed back into the glass. A bell tone rang out, not from above, but below. The stone beneath my feet trembled. Dust drifted from the rafters like ash. And then, faintly, I heard it again, whispering, hundreds of voices braided together into a single chant. "Confess, confess, confess." The confessional door creaked open. Inside, the seat was empty once more, but the shadows were wrong. They curled inward, forming a spiral, a tunnel of darkness that breathed and waited. I took a step forward, one step too many. The world fell away. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting inside the booth. My booth, but everything was reversed, the walls pressed inward, the lattice on the wrong side. A warm light flickered somewhere beyond, and I realized the other seat was occupied. A man sat opposite me, hunched, whispering a prayer I couldn't quite hear. The voice was ragged, bleeding, familiar. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," cried. He looked up. It was Father Marin. His eyes were wide, wet with confusion. "Elias, where are we?" "Hevery Spee." I reached for him, but the lattice between us glowed red hot, burning my fingertips. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "You were gone." They said you'd vanished. Tame. He shook his head, trembling. I tried to warn you. I heard the sound. It doesn't end, it only changes who listens. Then the light around us began to pulse, slow and deep, like a beating heart. The booth shuddered with every thud. The air filled with whispers, rising into screams. The door behind me slammed shut. The confessional groaned as if the church itself were breathing through it. Marin's face twisted in terror. You brought it back with you, Elias. It followed the sound, chattled first. The world bent inward, walls curving like the throat of a great bell. The pressure was unbearable. My ears filled with a low, constant tone, not ringing, but thrumming, as though vibrating from inside my bones. I gripped the brass key, desperate, and for a moment I understood this wasn't a key for a lock. It was a clapper, the thing that makes the bell speak. And it had always been meant for me. The voice returned, not Marin's, not mine, something older, layered, and vast. Every confession needs a priest. Every sound needs a voice, too. The rope of the bell swung down through the ceiling, impossibly long, coiling around my arm like a serpent. The booth rattled with fury. Marin screamed. The whispering rose to a deafening roar, 1,000 confessions spilling at once, each one clawing to be heard. Say the words, Elias, the voice demanded. Finish the sound. Cannot. I couldn't breathe. My arm burned where the rope tightened. In the corner of my vision, the brass key began to melt, dripping between my fingers. The booth's walls were closing in, folding like lungs collapsing under their own breath. I did the only thing left to do. I confessed. I doubted. I lied. I listened when I should have prayed. Well, his side, the voices screamed back, triumphant. And so you heard what should not be heard. Reperfang. A final, thunderous chime split the air. Not a sound, but a feeling, shaking every atom in the world. The booth shattered outward in a storm of splinters and black wind. I felt myself thrown back, tumbling through smoke and light and laughter that wasn't laughter. When I awoke, I was lying outside the church, beneath a broken window. The morning sky above was the color of pewter. The confessional was gone, burned to ash. The bell tower stood silent. Agnes was gone. Marin was gone. Only the brass key remained beside me, cold and clean, shaped now like a tear. I picked it up. From far off, too far to be real, a sound rolled through the hills. A single bell tone, and then another, each one closer. The last one so near, I could feel it inside my skull. I walked for hours, or days, I couldn't tell. The fog along the moor swallowed the road, the church, and the sky. My cassock was torn, my shoes slick with ash and seawater. Somewhere behind me, St. Mary of the Vale smoldered in silence, its tower finally still. I thought I'd escaped. At dusk, I reached a neighboring village, Grafton Hollow, a quiet cluster of stone cottages and a chapel smaller than the one I'd left behind. The townsfolk were kind, almost relieved to see a priest arrive unannounced. They said they'd been waiting for someone, that a man of the cloth had written ahead, promising to take confessions through the week. I told them they were mistaken. I'd sent no letter. But they insisted. Your name's already in the registry, Father Elias, the sacristan said, puzzled. Signed in your own hand. You arrived yesterday, 9. He showed me the book. And there it was my signature. Perfect, steady, written in ink still damp. A chill swept through me. The walls seemed to tighten. From the chapel beyond came a faint knocking. 3 soft taps. The sacristan frowned. "Ah, someone's waiting for confession already. Well, so." The sound came again, deliberate, rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. I felt my throat dry as dust. "That's odd," the man said. "We've only just built the booth last week. Haven't even tested the bell rope yet." They spat. I turned toward the nave. Candlelight trembled along the pews. The air smelled faintly of salt. From behind the curtain of the new confessional came a whisper, my own voice, calm, patient, and terribly familiar. "Come in, my child. You may begin." When to. The sacristan smiled faintly, not seeing the horror blooming in my face. "See, Father, you're already doing the Lord's work," was save rend. The brass key in my pocket pulsed once warm, alive. And from far above, through a ceiling that had never held a bell, came a single perfect chime. Story 3. The Choir Without Faces. My name is Elias Ward, and London swallowed me like a bell note in fog. They sent me to St. Peregrine's, a gray-backed cathedral tucked off an alley where the city thins to whispers after dark. The stone here holds old weather. Every step gives back a soft reply. I was told the children's choir had dwindled, families moved away. A choir master resigned. Rehearsals paused. Yet, on my first evening, as I crossed the nave, music unfurled from the chancel, treble voices, clear and bright as frost. A hymn I half remembered from childhood, except no lamps burned in the choir stalls. No lantern glowed in the organ loft. And the vestry ledger swore there'd been no rehearsal for 7 months. I stood beneath the rood screen and listened. The harmony was perfect. Almost, the descant floated a fraction behind the melody, as if the singers were following an echo that hadn't happened yet. Latin syllables turned inward on themselves, vowels blooming backward, amen, inhaled instead of released. Dust lifted in the music's wake like gray pollen. Somewhere high above, a stop on the organ sighed in and out without hands upon it. I called, "Children." The word broke against the stone and came back younger. From the empty choir stalls, the hymn rose again, sweeter, nearer, then paused on a held note that felt like breath pressed against my ear. Shall I open the vestry door and take us into first suspicion? The hymn ended the same way it had begun, without movement, without breath, as though the air itself had grown tired of sound. I stood in the nave until my knees ached. The last note lingered too long, stretching thin, then vanished with a faint click, like a candle snuffed beneath glass. The silence that followed felt wrong, not peaceful, but watchful. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. London has its own ghosts, echoing trains, rattling pipes, wind sneaking through iron gates. I blamed fatigue, the remnants of St. Taine, Mary still bruising my faith. But when I entered the choir loft to inspect the organ, I found the dust disturbed, a dozen small footprints scattered across the floor. Each was bare. Each pointed toward the altar. The choirmaster's office had been left untouched since his disappearance. His name, Thomas Greaves, was carved neatly on the door. Beneath the words, "Laudate pueri Dominum," praise, ye children, the irony cut deep. Inside, I found an old tape recorder. The label read, "Rehearsal, 14 March 3rd. I pressed play. Static, then singing. At first, it was the same hymn I'd heard last night. Soft, angelic, drifting, but halfway through, the tone warped. The children's voices slowed, vowels collapsing into sighs. A faint knock followed a metronome, a heartbeat. Then, a man's voice. Not like that. Again. Louder this time. She has Becton. Another round of singing. Then a scream. A door slamming. And finally, a single, shaking whisper that froze me where I stood. He said we'd never have to stop. The tape clicked off. That evening, as twilight spilled through the stained glass, I walked the length of the choir stalls again. No sound, no voices, only the faint scent of wax and dust. But when I reached the altar rail, I saw something that hadn't been there before. 8 hymn sheets, arranged neatly on the benches. Each bore a single name: Thomas, Clara, Edward, Mary, children. Their notes were inked in what looked like dark varnish. Only when I touched one did I realize it wasn't ink at all. It was sticky. A drop of something thick and brown clung to my thumb. And then, faintly, from the organ pipes above, came a breath, a single exhale that did not belong to the wind. "Father," a child's voice whispered from the loft, "you're late for practice." And so, the lamps along the nave flickered one by one, their glow retreating like footsteps. And in the reflection of the polished altar, I saw them, a row of children standing in the stalls, motionless, heads bowed, their faces blurred into a soft, colorless glow. I turned around. The choir stalls were empty. But their song began again low, and this time humming my name. By the third night, I had stopped trying to tell myself it wasn't real. The song came whether I wanted it or not, sometimes a whisper through the rafters, sometimes a clear chorus that filled the nave until the walls trembled. The melodies always began softly, like a prayer half remembered, then grew stronger, wronger, until the Latin dissolved into sobbing. I began recording them. Each tape ended the same, static, the scrape of wood, and a faint voice whispering, "Again." And so, it was always a child's voice, always the same word. That evening, I stayed in the loft with a lantern and a worn copy of the hymn book. The city outside was quiet. Rain streaked the windows. When the church clock struck 11, the air thickened. The smell of dust and something faintly sweet rotting lilies filled the space. Then came the first note. It began not from the choir stalls, but from inside the organ pipes. A single hum, impossibly long, echoing through brass and bone. My lantern trembled. The shadows on the wall began to move in rhythm with the sound, tall, thin shapes, swaying as if singing with mouths I could not see. I whispered a prayer, and the sound answered it, word for word. "Deliver us from evil. Deliver us from evil." But the echo spoke before I did, as though anticipating my breath. I turned toward the pipes. Condensation beaded along the metal, trickling down in dark streaks. Each drop that hit the floor made a soft note, not random, but perfectly pitched, composing a slow, deliberate melody. The children's voices joined in. First 2, then 4, then a dozen. The harmony built until it became unbearable. They sang under the melody now, a chant in Latin that I didn't recognize. Their tone had changed, not human anymore, thin and sharp, like the edge of ice sliding through flesh. From below, pews began to creak, moving on their own. The sound grew heavier, a thump, then another, like footsteps too light to belong to the living. I stepped forward. "Show yourselves," I shouted. the word cracking apart in my throat. The singing stopped, and in its place came breathing. Dozens of breaths, uneven, drawn through invisible throats. I could hear them shifting in the choir stalls, the shuffle of feet, the soft rustle of robes. Then something new, the scrape of nails across the marble, counting 1, 2, 3. My lantern flickered. The faces on the stained glass saints, angels, martyrs began to blur, their features melting into blank ovals of light. And then they sang again. This time not Latin, not prayer. My name? Elias, Elias. Each syllable dragged like a child learning to speak. I stumbled backward toward the loft stairs, but the air itself seemed to press against me. From the far end of the nave came a burst of laughter, high, childish, and horribly close. The organ roared to life. Keys slammed down by unseen hands, and the pipes screamed out a chord that made the floorboards buckle. The sound was not music, it was anguish. The entire church shook. Dust poured from the ceiling like ash. And beneath that deafening wall of sound, I heard a smaller, broken voice whisper from behind me. Please, Father, make it stop. He won't let us leave. Rest. I turned. A single figure stood in the choir aisle, a small boy in a tattered surplice, his hands clasped around a hymn book. His face, there was none, just smooth, pale skin where eyes and mouth should be. He tilted his head, as if listening to a sound only he could hear, then raised one finger to where his lips weren't, a silent, shushing gesture. The organ struck another note. The choir sang louder, faces fading into blank masks of light. And through it all, the faceless boy whispered, though he had no mouth, "We only sing what you teach us, Father, Mary." Then he was gone. The organ stopped. The silence fell hard, like something enormous had exhaled its last breath. In the stillness that followed, I realized my hands were stained black with soot and blood. And every page of the hymn book I held now bore the same title, written over and over in my own handwriting. The Choir Without Faces is. The next morning, London felt quieter, like the city itself had drawn a breath it was afraid to release. The cathedral's stones sweated from the night's rain, and the streets outside shimmered with a thin, feverish mist. I hadn't slept. My ears still rang with the echoes of that impossible choir. I returned to St. Peregrine's before dawn. The heavy doors groaned like sleepers disturbed too soon. Inside, the air was damp and thick, heavy with the scent of candle, soot, and old incense. The hymn book I'd carried home lay on the altar open, its pages warped. The title across every line was still the same, The Choir Without Faces. But beneath the repeated title, faint pencil marks trembled in the margins. At first I thought they were scratches, then I realized they were notations. Music, handwritten, and the handwriting was mine. My stomach turned. I didn't remember writing a note of it, but the scrawled signature at the bottom left, no doubt. Composed by Rev. Elias Ward, exhaloding. I tried to tear the page out. It resisted like flesh. The paper stretched, refusing to rip, and a low hum trembled through the altar, the first note of the melody. "Don't," a voice said behind me. I spun around. An old man stood in the aisle, tall, skeletal, his clerical collar stained with candle wax. His eyes glistened the color of smoke. "You can't destroy what the church already blessed," he murmured. "That hymn was sung here long before your name found its way onto it." Ended. My voice faltered. Who are you? Once, I was the choir master. Before Thomas Greaves, before him, another. We keep the song alive. He stepped closer, his cassock whispering against the floor. When the choir sang, their voices filled the hollow places of this city. The hymn carried faith into the dark. But one night, they sang too long, and the sound began to notice itself. And as he looked past me, toward the organ loft. You hear it now, don't you? The echo that breathes. It's not the children trapped here, Father. It's the music. It remembers every singer. Rinse. The church trembled. From the loft came a faint chord, soft, deliberate, almost tender. You wrote the hymn again, the old man whispered. You gave it shape once more. Now it wants its voice back. Christ. I felt it then, a vibration in the floorboards, moving up through my shoes, into my bones. The same pattern I'd felt beneath my ribs in every cursed place before. The heartbeat of the bell. No, I said, backing away. I won't sing it. Will. You already are. Howard. He lifted a shaking hand, pointing toward the nave. I turned and froze. The children stood there again, lining the pews in perfect rows, their white surplices luminous against the dim. But now their heads were tilted back, mouths open, mouths where there hadn't been any before, black cavities ringed with light. The choirmaster's lips barely moved. They've been waiting for you to lead them, Father. I have two presented. The organ roared to life, slamming through the air with thunderous chords. The first bars of the hymn swelled from the pipes, notes vibrating with such force that cracks veined the stained glass. Dust spiraled upward, forming shapes, faces without eyes, mouths without words. I stumbled backward, shouting over the sound, "Stop this! You're killing them!" And Salt, the old man smiled a thin, sad curl of lips. "No, Father, they're already gone. You're the only one who can free them. With thank you." He pressed something into my hand, a tuning fork, old and tarnished. "Strike it when the last note holds," he said, "and pray it breaks before you do, and for self." Then he turned and walked straight into the dark of the chancel, dissolving into the rising light, like smoke fading into a storm. The hymn rose higher. The children began to hum. And this time, I could hear the words beneath their breath. Not Latin, not prayer, but the same 6 syllables echoing like a curse. You wrote the song for us, tu also. The windows shattered inward. A wind poured through the church that smelled of metal and earth. The organ stopped abruptly, leaving the final note hanging in the air like a blade suspended in silence. And in that ringing emptiness, a single, soft voice spoke behind me, that same faceless boy, standing by the altar with his head tilted just so. "Father," he whispered, "it's your turn to sing. What is a proverb?" The tuning fork quivered in my hand. The tuning fork was still in my hand when the last echo died. The air settled with a sigh, as though the cathedral itself had been holding its breath. The children's shapes faded into mist. The candles rekindled on their own. For the first time in what felt like hours or centuries, Saint Peregrines stood in stillness. My knees buckled. I knelt before the altar, trembling, whispering half prayers that tasted like ash. The tuning fork was warm, its metal faintly singing, though no sound escaped it. I struck it once against the floor. Clang. The vibration hummed low, steady, pure. Then silence. The oppressive air lifted. The color returned to the windows. The marble no longer sweated. I felt tears roll down my face, part exhaustion, part disbelief. Could it be over? At sunrise, the city woke around the cathedral. Bells from nearby parishes told the hour mundane, harmless, human. Their sound didn't crawl under my skin. It almost felt holy again. For 2 days, peace returned. I held Mass each morning. Only a few parishioners came. No choirs, no songs. I avoided the organ loft, locked the vestry, and burned every hymn sheet I could find. The flames crackled quietly, cleanly. Smoke curled upward, soft and gray, no whispers inside it. Each night, I checked the tuning fork, still warm, faintly humming, like a heartbeat barely alive. By the 3rd evening, I almost believed it had ended. A soft knock woke me. 3 rap, precise, gentle. I sat up in my narrow bed, heart racing. The sound hadn't come from the door, it came from above, from the ceiling beams directly over my head. The air trembled once. The tuning fork, resting on the nightstand, began to move. Slowly, it turned in place, vibrating though nothing touched it. Then came a faint note, barely audible, a child's pitch, one perfect A, every Y. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it wasn't in the air, it was in me. The sound grew richer, harmonizing with something lower, older. A man's voice, singing beneath the child's tone. The melody was achingly familiar. I realized with horror it was my own hymn, the one I'd sworn never to sing again. I stumbled toward the window. London's streetlights shimmered in the fog below. For a moment, I thought I saw figures moving in the courtyard, small, white shapes, pacing in slow circles. Then the reflection in the glass shifted. The boy stood behind me again, the faceless one, his outline soft and trembling, light bleeding through where features should have been. His voice was faint, inside my skull rather than my ears. You freed the song, Father, but the song remembers its voice. I felt him. I turned, swinging the tuning fork wildly through the air. The metal struck the wall with a harsh clang. The vibration knocked the lantern from its hook. Light flared. Smoke filled the room. The boy was gone. But in his place, the walls began to hum. Not a melody now, a resonance. The whole building vibrating like a string drawn taut. My crucifix fell from the table, landing upright on the floorboards. I shouted a prayer, but the sound came out warped, doubled, distorted. My own voice sang back to me in harmony, a fraction behind. The choir had found its new conductor. The note built higher, climbing until glass shattered in the window frames. I pressed the tuning fork to my chest. Its vibration aligned with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was which. Then, sudden quiet. The hum stopped. My crucifix lay still. The air cleared. The fork cooled in my palm. I laughed once, weakly, disbelieving. Enough, I whispered. It's over. 2 helpings. I believed that lie until dawn. When the first sunlight touched the cathedral windows, the glass refracted the light into 100 colors: red, gold, violet, beautiful. But every color moved. Behind the painted saints, faint outlines pressed outward from inside the glass. Small hands, open mouths, singing without sound. And when I breathed against the nearest pane, the condensation shaped 4 words across the glass, letters forming from my own breath. You taught us well, eh? Then it melted away. The morning bells of London rang their usual hymn, but one note among them, clear, cold, and perfect, didn't fade. It held, and somewhere deep inside my throat, I could feel it vibrating. The morning bells of London should have been a comfort, but that single, perfect tone, steady, unwavering, followed me wherever I walked, through the fog-choked alleys, across the river, even within the hiss of the gas lamps. It pulsed under every other sound, too clean to be mistake, too alive to be coincidence. I left St. Peregrine's before noon, taking nothing but my Bible and the tuning fork. The moment the cathedral doors closed behind me, I heard children laughing somewhere distant. A choir rehearsal, I told myself. Anything but what it really was. The further I went, the louder it grew. By the time I reached the train station, the platform trembled with a rhythm only I seemed to notice. The brass rails hummed softly, the same note over and over, an A, perfect and patient. When the train arrived, its whistle harmonized. Every passenger turned their head toward me at once. Not with anger, not even curiosity, just recognition. Their lips parted, and in unison, too quietly for anyone else to hear, they began to hum. I don't remember buying the ticket, or how long the journey lasted. Only the rain on the carriage windows, the blur of countryside, and that endless undertone thrumming in the walls. I pressed the tuning fork against the glass. The vibration answered like a heartbeat through bone. When I finally stepped off, I realized the station was abandoned. Signs rusted, benches broken, the air still and heavy with salt. I'd taken the wrong train, or maybe the only one left for me. Ahead lay a chapel I didn't recognize. Its sign read St. Aurelia's Orphan Chapel. Of course. Children again. I stepped inside. The nave was small, lined with empty cribs instead of pews. Candles burned low, wax pooling like pale fingers. The air was warm, almost welcoming. In the center of the floor stood a single music stand, a worn score resting on it. The title read, "The Choir Without Faces." Below it, written in trembling ink, final verse, Father Elias Ward. My own handwriting. I backed away. The door slammed shut behind me. The score rustled as if stirred by a hand. Then voices. Soft, gentle, children. Father. Their tone was pleading, but in harmony. You left before we finished the song. There was. I shouted into the dark. I destroyed it. I burned every copy. A. Laughter not cruel, but sweet, sad, understanding. Not on paper, in us. Absolve. The hymn began again. The same impossible melody. But this time, there was no organ, no echo, only their voices, rising and rising, until it felt like the very air was burning with sound. The light from the candles warped, turning from gold to red, from red to a pale blue that stung my eyes. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears. The vibration didn't fade, it moved inside me, climbing my throat, lodging beneath my tongue. A hand brushed my shoulder, small, cold, a child's. I looked up. Dozens of them surrounded me now, pale, faceless, translucent, their robes fluttering in wind that didn't exist. They were not menacing. They were waiting, expectant. You began the hymn, Father. We can't finish it without you. Why? The score lifted from the stand, pages turning themselves until the last line stared back at me. a single phrase written in black ink that glistened wetly. The final note is blood and self. I understood then. The music had never wanted voices. It wanted resonance, something to vibrate through. The children stepped closer. Their hands reached for my face, gentle, trembling. I screamed. The sound tore through the room, and the hymn answered it, shaping it, tuning it until my cry became the final note. The resonance filled everything: wood, stone, flesh, thought. The candles burst. Then quiet. When I opened my eyes, I was standing before the altar. The children were gone. The score had burned itself to ash. The air was clear again. The tuning fork lay at my feet, cracked clean in half. Outside, dawn broke pale and empty. The birds sang again. London breathed. For a moment, I almost smiled, until I spoke. The words of a simple prayer left my mouth, but not in my own voice. The tone was pure, perfect, layered with 100 smaller echoes. And from the walls of the empty chapel, the choir answered. They were inside me now. I walked until the fog swallowed everything, leaving only the sound. Somewhere behind me, the bells of London began to toll, not in warning, but in rhythm. Every note followed my breath. Every echo carried my name. And for the first time since St. Adriel's, I understood what the voice beneath the bell had meant. The sound doesn't end, Father. It only changes who carries it. Quay. They said Father Elias Ward vanished on a rainy Thursday. No luggage, no letter. The doors of St. Peregrine's left unlocked, the candles still burning, though no one had lit them for days. The church fell silent after that. No masses, no choir, no parishioners brave enough to enter. Until one evening, 6 months later, a young curate from the archdiocese arrived to inspect the property. His name was Father Dorian Hale, a quiet man with steady hands and a voice made for hymns. He'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. He didn't believe them. The city was already dark when he stepped inside. The scent of dust and rain clung to the stone. He crossed himself once, then twice, muttering a small prayer against the draft. From somewhere in the nave came the faintest hum, so soft it might have been the wind in the rafters. But it wasn't the wind. The pitch was too pure. A single, perfect A. Dorian froze. Is someone here? As it true? The echo replied, patient and polite. You may begin. Father, weak-handed extant. He turned toward the altar. The hymn book lay open on the stand, untouched for months. The pages were clean except for one line, written fresh in dark ink. Final verse, Father Dorian Hale. And a drip fell onto the page. Another, then another. He looked up. The stained glass saints above the choir were weeping, thin trails of red snaking down their faces, pooling at his feet. The air shivered, and through the sound of falling drops came a low, familiar hum, the beginning of a hymn. Dorian's breath caught as the reflection in the glass shifted. The figure standing among the painted saints was not his own. It was another priest, gaunt, hollow-eyed, smiling faintly through the color of blood. Elias Ward. The hymn rose higher. Sing for them, Father, the reflection whispered. They're waiting. When? Dorian stumbled backward. The glass pulsed once, light bleeding outward. And then, from deep within the walls of St. Peregrine's, the bell of St. Adriel's rang. Once. Twice. A third time. Perfect pitch. Perfect memory. The city outside never heard it, but the church did. Story 4. The Stained Glass That Wept Blood. They sent me to St. Peregrine's in early winter. The letter from the archdiocese was brief. Assist the restoration. Resume the morning mass. Bring the parish back to life. Cleareds. But when I arrived, the church was already awake. The first thing I noticed wasn't the smell, old incense and mildew, but the light. Morning sun slanted through the stained glass, painting the marble in colors too vivid, too alive. Reds like fresh wounds, blues deep as bruises. As I crossed the nave, something warm fell against my hand. A drop, then another. I looked up. The saints were weeping. Thin red lines ran from their eyes down the glass, catching the light like veins. I reached to touch the surface, thinking it was rain from a cracked pane, but the texture was thick, sticky, warm. Blood. When I stepped back, my shadow moved out of sync, half a beat behind me. The sunlight flickered, and the figure of Christ on the cross in the window seemed to lower his head, ever so slightly, toward mine. And from somewhere deep within the church, faint and distant, a voice began to hum the first note of a hymn I didn't recognize. Or perhaps I did, and had simply forgotten who had taught it to me. The parish caretaker, a quiet woman named Mrs. Penrose, met me at the rectory steps that first evening. Her eyes carried the kind of exhaustion that faith can't heal. Best not to linger after sunset. Father, she said softly, fumbling with her keys. The light plays tricks through those windows. Well, tricks? I asked. Faces, she murmured. Sometimes familiar, sometimes not. Way. She left before vespers, crossing herself 3 times before the door. I stayed. By candlelight, the church looked almost beautiful again. The colors that had bled during the day were gone, the glass clean, the saints dry-eyed. The red stains on the floor had vanished too, as though they'd been absorbed back into the walls. I told myself it was condensation, that heat and cold were making the old panes weep. But when the clock struck 11, the glass began to breathe. Softly at first, a faint fog forming behind each saint's face, as if the figures were exhaling against the inside of the glass. Then, a pulse of light rippled through the window, bright enough to throw my shadow across the pews. I heard something behind it, a murmur, almost human, muffled like a voice underwater. I moved closer. Each pane vibrated gently, the colors shimmering like wet paint. When I pressed my ear to the nearest one, I could hear them, overlapping whispers, some weeping, some praying. But one voice rose above the rest, clearer than the others. Dorian. Drax. My name, spoken in the same calm cadence as confession. I staggered back, the candles shuddering in their holders. The voice came again, not from the glass this time, but from the reflection spreading across it. There, amid the saints, was the faint outline of a priest. Black cassock, gaunt face, eyes half closed as if in prayer. I whispered, Elias. Well, the figure opened its eyes. Every candle in the nave went out. The red glow from the glass deepened until it was the only light left, each window pulsing like a heart behind stone. The air grew thick with heat and copper, and when I tried to move, my boots stuck fast to the floor. The blood had returned, running in thin rivulets toward the altar. From somewhere high in the shadows, a low creak echoed wood bending, slow, rhythmic, like a rope under strain. Then a whisper, faint but close enough to chill the breath in my throat. "You came to finish the song, Reber." I looked up. In the largest window, behind the crucifix, the figure of Christ was no longer alone. Another silhouette stood beside him, head bowed, lips parted as if joining in his prayer. When lightning flashed outside, for just a heartbeat, I saw the truth of that second figure's face, and it was mine. The next day, I sealed every window with heavy drapes. Mrs. Penrose watched quietly as I hammered the last nail into the sill. "It won't matter," she said. "The light doesn't come from outside." End quote. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The church smelled of iron and beeswax. The air was damp, like a cellar full of forgotten prayers. Even without the sun, I could feel the stained glass pulsing behind the curtains, faint and warm, like an animal sleeping against the wall. That night, the sound began. At first it was faint, just a hum, no louder than a heartbeat. Then came the melody. A child's voice, thin and trembling, floating down from the high arch of the nave. The same tune I'd heard the morning I arrived, the one I hadn't recognized. Only this time, I did. It was the final hymn Father Elias had written, "The Choir Without Faces." I froze in the vestry, hands tightening around my rosary. The voice was alone at first, then joined by another and another. The harmony spread until it filled every inch of the church. The floor vibrated. Dust fell from the rafters like gray snow. The curtains shivered, the fabric darkening, where the hidden glass pressed against it from the other side. I could see faint shapes moving in the glow bodies, twisting within the light, mouths opening soundlessly as they sang. Dorian. The sound was so close, I thought someone stood beside me. I turned, but the pews were empty. "Dorian," it came again, from all directions, at once sweet, almost affectionate. The voices were no longer in harmony. They were pleading, breaking apart, as though each voice belonged to a different throat choking on the same note. The organ coughed to life. The keys struck on their own, a staggering rhythm that shook the air. The pipes glowed red from within, and the smell of hot metal filled the nave. I backed toward the altar, whispering fragments of scripture, but the verses twisted in my mouth. My words bent into rhyme, into song. The hymn forced its way through my throat. Each syllable scraped against my teeth. My own voice joined the children's, unwillingly, perfectly in tune. I ran to the curtains, clawing at the fabric, ripping it aside. The windows blazed. The saints were gone. In their place were faces I recognized, men and women, all priests. Their mouths opened in unison, blood running from their eyes like tears of devotion. In the center window, towering over the altar, was Elias Ward, his face serene, his eyes hollow, lips moving silently. He was conducting them. I stumbled backward as light poured through the glass, solid and alive. It moved like water, rippling across the floor toward me. The temperature dropped. My breath smoked in the air. The hymn grew louder, the melody collapsing into a single droning note that swallowed thought itself. And then silence. The light stilled, freezing mid-motion. From somewhere behind the altar, a door creaked open. The candle flames bent toward it, as if drawn by a breeze that wasn't there. A shadow stood in the doorway, thin, tall, head bowed. It raised one hand, the gesture slow and deliberate. Not a wave, not a warning, a command. The organ roared again. The stained glass shattered inward, every pane exploding at once in a rain of crimson shards. The sound was pure and perfect, the most beautiful note I had ever heard. When I opened my eyes, the light was gone. But in its place, every wall of the church had been etched with the same words, written in a dark, wet script that still dripped as I read them. Sing until he listens. K-Fins. Morning came, but the light felt wrong. It was too soft, too heavy, as though it had passed through something living before reaching me. The shards of stained glass still littered the floor red, blue, gold, but they no longer reflected the sun. They absorbed it. When I bent down to gather the fragments, the colors swam. Each piece shimmered with a faint image. Eyes, mouths, outstretched hands, faces pressed close as if trapped just beneath the surface. I touched one. It pulsed, warm, and then faintly music. A single note sang from the shard, vibrating against my palm. Another joined it, then another. Soon, the floor beneath me thrummed with a melody too low for human throats. I dropped the glass. The sound stopped. From the doorway, Mrs. Penrose gasped. "You shouldn't touch them," she said. "They remember, and it Towsend. Remember what drives to why. Everyone who ever looked for him, one is things are." She refused to say more. By dusk, she'd vanished. Her cottage stood open, her rosary still swinging from the door latch. That night, I stayed in the church alone. I told myself I'd pray until dawn, but fear has its own kind of worship. I sat at the altar, staring at the broken windows, waiting for the hymn to begin again. It didn't. Instead, a whisper rose from the shards at my feet. "Dorian." The sound was smaller than breath, but clear. I looked down. The pieces of glass were moving, rolling across the stone, arranging themselves into a pattern. A circle in its center, a single word formed, written in red light: "Confess, to." And then the voice again, stronger this time, no longer many, but one, familiar. "You shouldn't have sealed the light, and for the sanctioning." I turned toward the far wall. The largest window, once showing Christ upon the cross, was whole again, but not restored. The glass had reassembled into a new image. A priest standing beneath the crucifix, hands raised in prayer. The colors of his robes, the angle of his shoulders, identical to mine. And his face, Elias Ward. He was inside the glass, not reflected on it. His lips moved slowly, forming words I couldn't hear. Then the glass rippled like water, and he stepped forward, half emerging, his form caught between light and flesh. "You came to finish what I began," he said. His voice was calm, low, and unbearably close. I staggered back. "You're dead. I'm married." He smiled faintly. "So is the song, but death is only the echo of sound. Father Dorian, Mater." He raised his hand, and the shards around me lifted, spinning into the air like a constellation of color. Each piece hummed, alive. The hymn wanted a vessel. I carried it once. Now it seeks another. "Will?" "No," I whispered. He took another step, and with every movement, his form blurred between man and reflection. "You heard it, didn't you? The last note, the one still trapped inside you. Nutter day." My throat tightened. The hum beneath my ribs pulsed faster, matching the rhythm of his words. "Sing," Elias said, "and it will end." End quote. I shook my head. It never ends. Taine? Something shifted in his face. Pity, perhaps. Then you already understand. And the shards spun faster, forming a halo around him. The sound built a chord so pure it shook the pews from their foundations. The stone floor cracked beneath my knees. Stop it, I shouted. You'll destroy everything. And he stepped closer until the glass of his body brushed against my shoulder, warm as blood. Everything, he whispered. Or just you, as who stenders to harf. I felt the music enter my skin, the vibration crawling up my arm, through my jaw, into my skull. Every thought I'd ever had began to disintegrate into rhythm. For a moment, I saw what Elias saw, an endless cathedral made of sound, each wall a song, each echo a soul. And in the heart of that place, something vast and pulsing, listening. I fell backward, gasping. The vision snapped. Elias's outline flickered. His voice thinned, breaking apart like static. Finish it, he said, fading into the glass once more. Before it finishes you, I'm salt. The shards dropped to the floor with a sound like rain. Silence followed, deep and perfect. When I looked up, the window was empty again. Only my reflection remained kneeling where he had stood, my hands raised, light bleeding through my outline. By morning, the church was calm again. The light came through the broken windows like a blessing, soft, clean, almost kind. The air no longer hummed, and the glass shards lay motionless on the floor, drained of color. I swept them into a basin and locked them in the vestry, convincing myself that whatever I'd seen, whatever Elias Ward had become, was bound to the glass. Without it, the sound could not return. For the first time since my arrival, I slept. When I woke, the world was gentle. The city's bells tolled noon, muffled by fog. Mrs. Penrose's cottage remained empty, but even that felt like peace. I made tea, opened the chapel doors to let the air in, and prayed out loud to an empty church. No voices answered, no whispers beneath the floor, only the quiet creak of wood and the smell of candle smoke. I believed, foolishly, that the haunting had ended. 3 days passed before I noticed the light. It began at dusk, a soft glow from the corner of my room, not candlelight, but something warmer, redder. It shimmered along the wall, forming vague patterns that shifted with my breathing. At first, I thought it was the sunset leaking through the curtains, but when I pulled them aside, the window was black, the night thick and moonless. The light wasn't coming in. It was coming out. From beneath my skin, tiny veins along my wrists glowed faintly, the color of old glass. When I pressed my hand to the wall, the light seeped through my palm, leaving a faint, trembling imprint, a cross made of color. My heartbeat slowed, echoing softly in my ears. Every pulse left a faint chime in the air, a note too pure to belong to anything living. I fell to my knees. No, I whispered. You're gone. You're gone. How have to do lines, the do expected eyes, with the siles, with the mantry howl, mackin for silfrums, and casprow, by. But the church disagreed. The walls began to brighten, each stone bleeding thin lines of color, crimson, gold, blue. The shapes crawled upward, tracing the outlines of saints and martyrs that no longer existed. In seconds, the broken stained glass had repainted itself across the nave, not from light shining through, but from light radiating outward from me. I stumbled toward the altar, clutching the tuning fork I had taken from Elias's old box. Its cold metal steadied me. "Please," I said to the air. "I've done everything. I've sealed the glass. I've burned the hymn. A voice interrupted, calm and familiar, as if standing beside me. "You prayed, Father, and prayers are just songs with nowhere to go. His one." I turned. Elias's reflection had returned, not in the window this time, but in the polished altar marble. He stood where I stood, hands raised, face peaceful, light streaming from his eyes. "You carried the light well," he said gently, "but the song needs a sanctuary." Within, the walls trembled. The crucifix above the altar began to drip red, thin lines of warmth falling onto the stone below. The smell of copper filled the air. I reached for the tuning fork, desperate. "You used me, Will." "No," Elias whispered, smiling faintly. "You finished me, cost in merit." The glow inside me flared bright, searing hot. My vision swam. The entire church now burned with light, not fire, but color, bleeding through the cracks, through my skin, through my voice. I screamed, and the sound came out as music, a perfect, resonant chord that rattled every pane in the city. The blood on the crucifix turned to light, then to song. The church pulsed once, like a heart, then stillness. When I woke, dawn had returned. The walls were clean, the glass whole, the altar spotless. I stood shakily, every inch of me aching. My reflection in the window smiled back, peaceful, harmless. The hymn was gone. The colors were calm. I almost believed I was free, until I turned toward the nave. Every saint in the newly restored glass had my face, and behind their eyes, faintly, a glow began to pulse, one note, steady and patient, waiting for its conductor. That night, I could no longer breathe inside the church. Every wall shimmered faintly, alive with quiet light. The air trembled with color, pulsing with my heartbeat. Wherever I stepped, the glow followed, crawling over the stone. The pews, the altar, the saints in the windows watched, my own face reflected in every halo. I understood then. I wasn't inside Saint Peregrine's anymore. Saint Peregrine's was inside me. I made my decision before dawn. If the song was trapped in me, I would silence it the only way left. I gathered kerosene from the rectory storehouse, soaked the floorboards, and prayed for the strength to see it through. As I worked, the whispering began again, not loud this time, almost tender. "Father, you would burn your own church. I mean, you would burn us." We acclaimed. Their voices rose from the glass, from the walls, from within my ribs. "Not you," I said. "The sound. Track to do. We are the sound. Every ticked." The words vibrated through the air, low and resonant. Dust drifted from the rafters as though shaken by breath. The crucifix above the altar trembled. The bronze figure's head tilted downward. Elias's reflection appeared again in the window behind it, eyes bright as fire. "You can't destroy what was blessed in your blood." I would fire. I struck the match. The flame caught instantly, a thin silver tongue crawling along the aisle. The scent of oil and incense filled my lungs. Smoke rose in ribbons, hurling like music notes. The colors in the windows moved, flaring brilliant, almost beautiful. The faces of the saints twisted mine, among them, their mouths opening wide in a silent wail. The fire answered. The hymn began again, It wasn't sung this time. It was the fire. Every crackle, every roar, shaped itself into melody. The burning pews groaned in harmony. The collapsing beams struck percussion. The entire church became an instrument alive, singing through its own destruction. I dropped to my knees, hands pressed to my ears, but there was no escaping it. The music was in the air, in my bones, in my pulse. My body shook with each note, every muscle vibrating in time. Dorian. Elias's voice came through the smoke, calm, almost mournful. You've become what I was. You can't kill the hymn. You can only carry it. Tridents. The light inside me surged. My veins burned gold. The tuning fork still hanging from my neck began to glow, white hot against my chest. I grabbed it. It vibrated violently, screaming against my skin. Strike it, Elias whispered from the fire. One final note. Takes. The smoke parted just enough for me to see him standing in the flames, untouched, the edges of his cassock turning to ash that never fell. I raised the tuning fork and slammed it against the stone floor. The vibration tore through the air like thunder. The hymn faltered, the harmony twisting into dissonance. Windows exploded outward, the stained glass shattering into a storm of molten color. The sound became unbearable. My heart pounded in rhythm with it, faster, harder, until pain bloomed through my chest. The tuning fork melted in my hand. Then silence. Not quiet. Absence. The fire died instantly. The colors vanished. The church stood blackened and still. I was on the floor, unable to move. The light inside me was gone. For the first time in months, I couldn't hear the hum beneath my ribs. I thought I had done it. I almost laughed. Until I saw my shadow. It wasn't mine. It stood, upright, while I lay prone. It moved before I did, hand reaching toward the altar. Its outline glowed faintly, just like the light that had lived in my body. And then, as I watched, it stepped away from me, entirely separating, like breath leaving a mirror. Elias Ward stood there once more, whole again, his body made of color and smoke. "The song is a circle," he said softly. "You broke it, only by giving it form. Ways." I reached out, weakly. "Take it back. Maybe 4. I already have. Cayman." He smiled, not cruelly, not kindly. "You gave it a new voice. Father, the church will sing again. By Phaley." He began to fade, light pouring from his chest, rising through the cracked roof into the morning sky. The last thing he said was not to me, but to the air. "Amen. Bind." When I woke, I was outside, lying among the ruins. The fire brigade found nothing but soot and glass. They said the church had collapsed during restoration. But when I looked up through the veil of smoke, I saw something glimmering in the haze. High above the city, light moved like sound colors shifting in slow rhythm, glowing against the clouds. And faintly, beneath the ringing in my ears, I could hear it again, the children's choir, soft and endless, singing through the wind. I closed my eyes, and though my lungs burned with smoke, I whispered the words I swore I'd never speak again. "Deliver us from evil." "Way," the wind answered, gentle and bright, "as you delivered us, Father, and ex-Selphin." The newspapers called it a miracle. Priest survives cathedral inferno, only ashes left behind, and blasted for it. They said the blaze consumed Sant, peregrines in under 7 minutes, that I was found kneeling at the gate, untouched by the fire that melted stone. I don't remember kneeling. I don't remember leaving the church at all. The archdiocese ordered an immediate restoration. Workers cleared the ruins, salvaged what little remained, a few blackened pews, fragments of melted glass, a single brass crucifix warped into a spiral. They built anew upon the same foundation. Different walls, different altar, same light. It began on the first morning mass after the rededication. The new rector, Father Connolly, described it later in his statement. When the sun rose through the east wall, there were no windows yet, but the light still came through, colored, moving. It painted the walls like living glass. He paused in his testimony, trembling. And there was a figure in it, standing at the altar, smiling. And the photographs taken that morning confirmed it. A silhouette formed entirely of light, robed, head bowed. Not Elias Ward this time. Dorian Hale. No one can explain how it appeared. There were no surviving images of him. Yet the likeness was exact. Each sunrise since, the colors have returned red, blue, gold spilling across the stone like blood reborn as radiance. The parishioners say the light hums if you listen closely enough. Just one note. Perfect pitch. The workmen who sleep on site at night have stopped talking about the sounds they hear, footsteps pacing in the nave, a faint child's hymn carried on the drafts. They've sealed the crypt beneath the floor, where the old altar once stood. But sometimes, when the wind cuts through the scaffolding, you can hear it. A soft knock. 3 times. Then, a voice, distant but clear. "Father, you missed the final verse. What is to Cain?" And though the new saint, Peregrine's, no longer has a bell tower, the neighbors swear that at exactly 33 amperes, a single bell tolls. Once, twice, a third time. Perfect, beautiful, unending. Story 5. The Light Beneath the Ashes. They called it the Resurrection Project. And fair. The Archdiocese wanted proof measurements, data, something the newspapers could print without using the word miracle. So they sent a team of restorers and physicists to St. Peregrine's, and they sent me to, not to pray this time, to observe. The church had been rebuilt from its ashes, but nothing about it felt new. Every wall breathed faint warmth. The air shimmered, like heat from invisible coals. And in the mornings, when sunlight passed through the empty frames where the stained glass had once been, colors still spilled across the altar, red, blue, gold, though there was no glass left to catch it. The lead physicist, Dr. Alistair Venn, said it was a refraction phenomenon. He placed spectrograph sensors around the nave, muttering about unexplained wavelengths, and is eleving huer has, and is sedity huer has, and is sedity huer has. The readings came back impossible. The light pulsed. Every 33 seconds, its spectrum shifted as though responding to a heartbeat. I told them it wasn't responding to them. It was listening. That first night, when the others went to their tents outside, I stayed behind to pray. And when I opened my eyes, the colors on the wall were moving, gathering into a single shape. My own. At first, the scientists thought the anomaly was a trick of dust. When sunlight filters through microscopic soot, it bends strangely. That's what Dr. Venn told the press. But when he ran the air samples through his portable analyzer, he went quiet. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he called for me. "Father Dorian," he said, his voice unsteady. "You'll want to see this. Now." He led me to the temporary lab set up in the transept, once a chapel of saints, now crowded with wires and humming machines. The air was cold enough to bite. On a monitor, spectral lines rippled in color. Red, gold, blue. The same pattern I had seen pulsing through the church walls after the fire. We took samples from the eastern wall, then continued. Thought it was carbon residue, but... He clicked a key. The image changed the wavelengths, reorganizing into shapes. Not chemical. Organic. "There's DNA in the light, Father. In Placer." He swallowed hard. "Human." "That?" I stared at the screen. The patterns almost formed letters or prayers or veins. "Whose?" I asked. "That's the problem," he said. "It's alive, but it's not whole, like it's waiting for something to complete it." "No." I looked up at the far wall, where the sensors blinked softly in the dark. The faint glow that seeped through the cracks in the stone pulsed with perfect rhythm, one beat every 33 seconds. I felt it match the throb behind my ribs. "Maybe it's you," one of the interns joked nervously. "You're the miracle, Father." "Chounds." The others laughed weakly. But Venn didn't. That night, he insisted on taking one last sample directly from the light itself. He held a sterilized slide beneath the colored shimmer that bled through the wall. The glow flickered, almost recoiling. "It doesn't like to be touched," he muttered. He slipped the slide into his case, sealed it, labeled it sample 9 amperes. Before we left the church, he glanced back once, frowning. It followed my hand. "Too fired?" I didn't answer, because I'd seen it. 2. The light had followed him, a soft thread of gold stretching toward his sleeve, like a breath that didn't want to end. Later, in the rectory, I found him awake, staring at his palm under the desk lamp. There was a faint glow beneath his skin. "It's in me now," he whispered. "Not to me, not to anyone. It's learning." And a pastor. By morning, Dr. Venn was gone. His tent stood open, his equipment still warm, but his clothes folded neatly beside his cot. And when I entered the church alone, the colors on the wall had changed. Where once there was only light now, there was a shadow inside it. A man's outline, arms raised, as though caught mid-prayer. Not Elias. Venn. For the first time since the fire, I prayed without words. I didn't dare speak. The air inside St. Peregrine's had become too alert, as if each syllable might teach it another way to breathe. The research team returned at dawn to find Dr. Venn's notes open on the altar, a single phrase scrawled again and again. "It sings below hearing." To them, they ran new scans that morning. Every sensor recorded a faint frequency hidden beneath the hum of electricity, 33 hertz, the same rhythm as the light's pulse, low enough that we couldn't hear it, but our bodies could feel it. A slow, internal pressure in the chest, like standing too near a great organ pipe. By evening, the pitch rose. We could hear it now, a thin whistle bleeding from the walls. One of the technicians, Amira, covered her ears and laughed shakily. "It sounds like breathing through glass," she said. The others joined her, half nervous, half dazzled, until the sound changed. The whistle folded into something closer to a voice no. Many voices layered so tightly they formed a single tone, a language made of exhalations. "Do you hear that?" Amira whispered. "It's saying my name, Anne." I wanted to tell her she was mistaken, but the air around me thickened. I heard my own name too, Dorian. Not spoken, drawn out, sung by something that remembered the shape of my lungs. The lights on the sensors blinked erratically. The church floor trembled in gentle rhythm, like a living creature shifting in its sleep. Every instrument went wild, decibels spiking, wavelengths doubling. Then silence. The team exhaled as one. Someone laughed. That's when the recordings began to play themselves. From the computers, from the radios, from the very metal of the scaffolding, came our own voices, each of us speaking lines we had never said. "Don't move, Father. Trimes. It's still behind the wall. Absotam. It wants to come through. It's stalk." The playback warped into static, then into humming. A melody, faint but recognizable, the choir without faces. I froze. "Stop the audio," I ordered. "It's not coming from the audio," Amira said. The glow crawling along the walls brightened to a feverish gold. Between the shifting lights, human silhouettes flickered, dozens of them, suspended inside the spectrum itself. Faces half-formed, mouths open mid-note. One by one, the scientists dropped their instruments, backing away, but the shadows in the light mirrored every step, perfectly delayed as though rehearsing our movement. Then a new sound joined the choir, breathing, deep and ragged, filling the entire nave. Every candle went out, snuffed by invisible lungs. I reached for my crucifix, but the metal burned my skin. The air was alive now, resonating with thought. The light crawled up the pillars and across the ceiling until the church seemed submerged in a living aurora. "Father," Amira said softly, "it's not reflecting us anymore." "Well," I looked up. The colors on the walls no longer held our shapes. They showed something inside the light figures kneeling in prayer, faces turned upward, mouths open. I counted them. There were 7, the exact number of us who had entered the church that morning. And in the center of them all, a taller shadow formed, its edges blurred, its chest pulsing in time with the glow. "Dr. Venn," I whispered. The light answered by inhaling, a sound like wind tearing through bone. Then came the words, soft, layered, unmistakably his. "We are past listening, Father. Now we resonate, and respected." Every sensor burst into sparks. The windows shook, and the last thing I saw before the power failed was Amira's face reflected in the golden wall, eyes wide, mouth moving in silent song. When the lights returned, she was gone. Only her outline remained, etched perfectly into the shining stone, singing in the dark spectrum where the living cannot follow. I should have fled that night. But how do you run from something that lives in light? By morning, the remaining team wanted to leave. They packed what was left of the equipment, whispering in half-sentences, their faces pale from a night without sleep. Amira's disappearance had broken something in them, yet no one dared to say her name aloud. Not after we found the shape of her mouth, still moving faintly in the wall when the dawn touched it. Dr. Ven's journal remained on the altar, open to the final entry. The light isn't showing us, it's remembering us. Welkens of Meyer. By noon, the church had emptied. Only I stayed. I told myself it was faith, but it was guilt. Elias Ward had burned for his song. I couldn't turn away from mine. I waited until the sun dipped low and bled through the open window frames. The light spilled across the nave like liquid gold, reaching for the stone, crawling up the pillars, alive again. That was when I saw him. Dr. Ven. Or what was left of him. His shape wavered in the center of the altar, built entirely of color and trembling air. His eyes were hollows of light. Every breath he took bent the world around him, like heat warping glass. Father Dorian, he said softly, you stayed, as it never. His voice was wrong-layered, refracted, carrying echoes of others, the rest of the team, Elias, even me. I stepped forward cautiously. You're inside it now, and as from the flash. He smiled, or tried to. We're learning. You made us remember. I will, Day. I gripped my crucifix, though the metal still burned. What do you want? Way. To finish the measure. Why? The air quivered. The walls brightened. The colors that formed him began to spread outward, bleeding into the church's surfaces like veins of living glass. Faces flickered inside them, Amira's, the others, even mine, half-formed, mouthing silent hymns. The light listens through us, Ven continued, but it needs a conductor, someone who can hold the sound, and we flangs. He extended a hand toward me. Light dripped from his fingers like molten wax. You still carry it, Father. The final note, the one Elias left unfinished, and itself. The floor shuddered under my feet. The pews groaned as though filled with breath. The glow reached toward me, hungry. If you join, he said, we can be whole, having self-endeavorings part. For an instant, I sought the promise of peace, the silence after the song, the end of the ringing that had haunted my chest since St. Peregrine's burned. But behind that peace, I sensed something deeper, a rhythm too vast, too patient, the same presence I had glimpsed years ago beneath the bell tower. This was no miracle. It was continuation. The hymn was moving from sound to light, from voice to flesh, adapting as it always had, and now it wanted form. I stepped back, clutching the crucifix hard enough to draw blood. The moment the blood touched the air, the glow recoiled, faintly hissing, as if the light itself remembered pain. It's not salvation, Ven, I said. It's hunger, Trupsand. He tilted his head. The colors inside him darkened, curdled into crimson and blue. All hunger is faith, Father. Faith consumes. And the words hit like a prayer turned inside out. The light surged forward, wrapping around me like silk. Every nerve in my body vibrated. I could feel my heartbeat sinking to its rhythm, one pulse every 33 seconds. My breath came out glowing, soft and gold. Ben's form stepped closer. Don't resist. You've always been one of us. Was lighted. I raised the crucifix again, whispering the only thing left that still belonged to me. Deliver us from evil. For a moment, the air stopped. The light flickered, uncertain. The glow around his face fractured into shards. Through that fracture, I saw something terrifying, not the scientist, not Elias, but something older, vast, watching through them all. I slammed the crucifix into the ground. The light screamed. Every window shattered inward. The sound tore through the nave like a thunderclap. The shape that had been Ven broke apart into streams of color that fled into the cracks of the stone. When the dust settled, the church was dark again. Only one patch of gold remained, a faint shimmer beneath the altar where his shadow had fallen. And from within it, barely audible, came a whisper. "You can't destroy what sings in silence." Have saying. I pressed my hand to my chest. The glow under my skin had returned, faint but steady. The hymn was still there. For the first time in months, the church was quiet. No hum, no pulse behind the walls. The air itself felt hollow, like lungs finally emptied. I stayed kneeling for hours. The broken glass glittered around me like a field of dying stars, and I thought, maybe this was mercy. The light was gone, the music silenced. The last echo of Elias, of Ven, of them all had burned itself out. That night I slept inside the nave, wrapped in my cassock, the crucifix clutched against my chest. I dreamed of rain, cold, endless, washing soot from my hands. In the dream, I could finally hear the city again. The carriages, the bells, the wind, human sounds, simple sounds. When I woke, the sound was still there, but softer, inside me. I told myself it was my pulse, until it began to harmonize. The next morning, I wrote a report for the archdiocese. The phenomenon appears dormant, I wrote. The light no longer manifests. Recommend closure of sight. Drain. But as I wrote, I noticed the ink bleeding slightly across the paper, forming faint ripples that pulsed outward from each word. Every sentence carried rhythm, not random, but measured. I read the report aloud. My voice trembled on every third syllable, vibrating against the inside of my skull. Then an echo. The same words repeated, softer, half a second behind. From inside my chest, I pressed my palm against my ribs and felt the vibration there, subtle but undeniable, a chord resonating under the bone. The light had gone nowhere. It had simply moved in. By sunset, the color had returned to my skin, faint gold glimmering along the veins of my wrists. The glow intensified whenever I prayed. Every amen made the air shimmer, as if someone unseen repeated it in unison. The crucifix around my neck grew warm again. I went to the confessional, hoping prayer might drown it out. But each time I whispered a verse, 100 voices answered through the wood. They used my words, my tone, my breath. I slammed the door and backed away, trembling. "Leave me," I shouted. The echo came instantly. "Leave us." Well, a pause. Then, softly, "You can't," Weshended. The candles along the aisle flickered, aligning their flames to my breathing. The air filled with that faint, metallic smell, not blood this time, but light, sharp as ozone after lightning. My hands shook as I opened my Bible. Every page I touched turned translucent, letters melting into shifting color. Between the lines, faintly, the text rewrote itself, not scripture, but music notation. The choir without faces. My handwriting. I dropped the book. "No," I whispered. I ended this. "We four." The floor vibrated gently, as if the church disagreed. From the broken arch of the apse, a thin beam of gold slipped through the cracks. It climbed the wall, tracing slow, deliberate shapes. Faces again, not Elias, not Ven but mine. Dozens of them, mouths open, mid-prayer. The sound rose from the stones, low and soft, a hum like the first breath before song. My breath hitched. I tried not to move, not to speak, but the hum mirrored my heartbeat, faster, louder. I fell to my knees, clutching my chest as the glow beneath my ribs flared, searing hot. Through the roar in my skull came words not shouted, not even spoken, breathed directly into me. You carry the altar now. As section, I screamed, but the scream came out in perfect pitch, the same note that had haunted me since the first bell at St. Adriel's. The sound climbed higher, filling the nave. My own voice split into harmonies, one human, one not. And for a moment, I felt peace. The light within me expanded until I could see through my skin, my bones, my breath. I wasn't alone. They were there, the children, the priests, the choir, Elias, Ven, all inside the same brightness, singing without pain. Then the peace shattered. The sound dropped into a low, grinding chord that shook the floorboards loose. The walls began to weep again, not blood this time, but light, leaking in thin streams down to the altar. I crawled to my feet, gasping. The crucifix fell from my neck, its metal glowing dull red. You said you'd silence us, the choir murmured through me. But we were never noise. I was not. I stumbled to the door, light bleeding from my fingertips, painting every step behind me in gold. And when I reached for the handle, I saw it, my reflection in the brass, smiling faintly. Not my mouth, not my eyes, something else wearing them. Don't leave, it whispered. We're almost holy and fast. The night I tried to leave St. Peregrine's, the air was so still that even the fog seemed to hold its breath. I'd packed nothing, there was no point. You can't pack faith, or guilt, or light. The church door stood open behind me, the nave glowing faintly like a lantern filled with honey. For a moment, I believed it would let me go. Then the sound followed. It began as a hum behind my ribs, then crept outward until the pavement itself vibrated beneath my boots. The street lamps flickered in rhythm. I broke into a run. Every window I passed mirrored my reflection, but not as I was. Each showed a fraction of light blooming from my chest, growing brighter the farther I ran. By the time I reached the river, the water reflected me as a column of gold. Father Dorian, a voice murmured in the current, don't run from the song, and of where to Sylph. I stumbled to the railing, gasping. The hum rose in pitch, filling the air with trembling color. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled not St. Peregrine's, not any church I knew. The note hung, multiplied, became a chord. Lights flared across the city. Street lamps, windows, even the fog itself shimmered in slow, perfect rhythm. The hum inside me had spread. The whole of London was breathing in time with my pulse. I fell to my knees on the bridge, clutching the crucifix that had once burned me. Now it was cold, lifeless, the metal dull. I tried to pray, but every word came out sung. Deliver us, the city answered. Hundreds of unseen voices whispering from the windows, from the drains, from the water below, from evil, nigh. Every lamp along the bridge blazed white, blinding. A wind roared through the streets, carrying the music with it, my hymn, Elias's hymn, the children's choir, all woven together into one vast resonance. The world had become a cathedral. "You see," said the voice behind me. I turned. Elias stood at the far end of the bridge, his cassock fluttering in the wind. He wasn't glowing anymore. He looked human again, soft-eyed, almost kind. "You've freed it," he said. "The hymn needed a city to live in. It was never meant for one soul." I shook my head, backing away. "No, it's feeding. Quest and forder." He smiled faintly. "Faith and hunger are the same thing. You should know that by now. In Stack 2, the light around us intensified. Behind him, the skyline pulsed the domes, the spires, the glass towers, each window a note, each shadow a verse. London was singing itself apart. I felt it drawing at me, hugging every drop of warmth from my veins. The glow under my skin flared until I could see my bones outlined in gold. "Join the harmony, Dorian," Elias said softly. "Let go. Welcome tension." The bridge shuddered. The river below boiled with light. I clutched the crucifix, raised it high, and screamed not words, but a single broken no that fractured into every note I'd ever sung. The sound hit the air like a hammer. The chord collapsed. Windows shattered for miles. The lamps burst, showering sparks. The city went dark. When the ringing stopped, I was alone. The hum had vanished. My chest was still. I had done it. Or so I thought. At dawn, rescuers found me on the bridge, blind from the flash. They said the city's power grid had failed. A coincidence. They said the strange aurora over the Thames was a weather phenomenon. But I heard it, beneath their voices, beneath the hiss of the radio static. A faint tone lingered 33 hertz, pulsing steady. In the hospital ward, the machines around me began to blink in rhythm. The nurse hummed softly while adjusting the drip. She didn't realize it was the same tune. When I closed my eyes, I saw the light again, not in the church, not in the city, but in everyone. Tiny threads of gold beneath their skin, flickering like living stained glass. Elias had been right. The hymn had found its congregation. That night, I wrote my final entry. Faith is contagious. Sound becomes light. Light becomes flesh. We have built heaven in our own image, and it sings, has fallen. I left the crucifix on the bedside table. The metal was warm again, humming faintly. Outside the window, London glowed, every building haloed, every shadow radiant. From somewhere deep beneath the city, 3 low chimes rose through the ground. Once, twice, a third time, perfect pitch. And when I whispered, "Amen," 1,000 unseen voices whispered it back. Before we part, listener, close your eyes for a moment. Can you hear it? That faint hum beneath the silence, the one hiding under your own breath. It's quieter now, almost gone, like the last echo inside a bell that refuses to die. That's where they linger. Father Elias, Dr. Venn, Dorian Hale, the children who never stopped singing. They exist in that thin vibration between sound and silence, where prayer and memory become the same thing. If you ever pass a church after midnight and see the windows glowing, though no candle burns inside, don't go closer. The light isn't shining out. It's looking in. And if you hear a note that seems too perfect, too human, don't hum along. Don't whisper amen. Because the song doesn't end when the voice does. It waits for the next breath to carry it. Maybe yours. So, Before we end tonight, gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. There are still hymns to be heard, still voices waiting behind the glass, still a final verse left unsung. Sleep now. Let the quiet hold you. But listen closely, because somewhere, far beneath the world's noise, a single note still trembles, and it's getting louder. Good night, listener, and may the silence remember your name.